Over 9 million men died fighting in World War I, but here we're going to talk about the last man to perish in the war, dying mere seconds before the war's end, a death that was tragically avoidable. Henry Gunther was born on June 6, 1895 in East Baltimore, Maryland, the son of German-American parents. Raised in a tight-knit German Catholic community, Henry's early life reflected the story of many working-class immigrant families. His father was a tailor, and Henry eventually found clerical work as a bookkeeper at a local bank. He was mild-mannered, dutiful, and not particularly drawn to violence or politics. But as the war in Europe escalated, he was eventually drafted into the United States Army in 1917. The war put German Americans in a deeply uncomfortable position. In cities across America, German street names were changed, German books were burned, and sauerkraut was patriotically renamed Liberty Cabbage. People with German surnames were viewed with suspicion, regardless of their loyalty. For Henry, whose ancestry was plainly visible in his name and community, the pressure to prove his American patriotism must have been immense. He was assigned to the 313th Infantry Regiment, part of the 79th Division. The unit, formed largely from Baltimore area men, trained at Camp Meade in Maryland before shipping off to France in July of 1918. Henry served not as a frontline soldier at first, but as a supply sergeant, an unglamorous but vital role, issuing uniforms, boots and rifles to the men of his company. But he still witnessed the brutality of life in the trenches and wrote a letter home to a friend. In it, he discouraged him from enlisting, complaining about the conditions and the treatment of soldiers. It wasn't an act of treason or disobedience, just a candid personal reflection on military life. But military censors intercepted the letter and the army did not take kindly to it. As punishment, Gunther was demoted from sergeant to private and reassigned as a rifleman. The demotion stung deeply. For a man like Gunther, conscientious, quiet and proud, the public shame of being stripped of rank weighed heavily. Perhaps he felt he let down his family, perhaps he feared he had fed into suspicions of disloyalty. Whatever the case, something changed in Henry after that. According to comrades, he became more withdrawn, more eager to redeem himself. He volunteered for difficult tasks. He seemed to want to prove something. By November 1918, the war was nearing its conclusion. Germany was in retreat, its economy collapsing and morale evaporating. Peace talks were now underway and rumours swirled in the trenches that an armistice was imminent. Still, the fighting raged on. Machine guns continued to spit death and artillery shells tore through fields and forests. It would take more than hope to stop the war. It would take signatures, ceremonies, and a clock striking the 11th hour. On the morning of November 11th, the orders finally came. The armistice had been signed in a railway carriage in the forest of Compiègne at 5 am. The ceasefire would take effect at exactly 11 am. That meant for 6 more hours, soldiers on both sides would keep fighting, an absurd and tragic technicality. Some commanders, knowing peace was coming, held their men back, but others did not. If you'd like to learn more about the final day of World War I, including the story of Henry Gunther, check out 11th Month, 11th Day, 11th Hour by Joseph E. Persico. Link is in the description. American government and military leaders were notably absent from the armistice negotiations that ended World War I. General John J. Pershing, who commanded the American expeditionary forces in Europe, was firmly against halting the war without a full military defeat of Germany. He believed that anything short of marching into Berlin would allow the enemy to escape full accountability. Pershing's resistance to the ceasefire translated into direct orders. US forces were to keep advancing, even as peace talks progressed and after the armistice had been officially signed in the early hours of November 11th. The cost of that decision was staggering. On the final morning of the war alone, the US military suffered roughly 3,500 casualties. Across all Allied forces, more than 11,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or went missing. Mere hours or even minutes before the guns fell silent at 11 am. The very last of these avoidable deaths was Henry Gunther's. On the morning of November 11, 1918, Company A of the 313th Infantry pressed forward under orders, advancing towards a small village just a dozen miles north of Verdun, and not far from the Belgian frontier. At 9:30 am, they had just 90 minutes to go before the armistice would take effect, but the battlefield made no allowance for what was coming. German artillery erupted and several soldiers from Company A were struck down. Soon after, word filtered through the ranks. The armistice had been signed. The war would officially end at 11 am. Relief swept over many, but it was short-lived. Alongside that message came a stark order from Brigadier General William Nicholson. There would be absolutely no let-up until 11 AM. The fight, for all practical purposes, was still on. As the clock edged closer to the final hour, Company A drew within sight of their objective. Through the lifting fog, the outline of the village came into view. 2 German machine gun nests were positioned on the village outskirts, but the soldiers manning them did not open fire. On both sides, men lay low, silently watching the minutes pass. It seemed for a brief moment that sanity might prevail, that no one would die in the final breaths of a war already over. Then, without warning, Private Henry Gunther rose from his position and charged. His fellow soldiers yelled after him, begging him to stop. The German gunners, startled, stood and motioned for him to turn back. Even they didn't want to shoot, but Gunther didn't slow down. He fired his gun as he closed in, and the Germans responded with a short burst. 5 rounds rang out. 1 bullet struck Gunther squarely in the temple. He collapsed instantly, just moments before the hour struck 11. He was declared killed in action at 10:59 AM, the last soldier to die in World War I. The immediate reaction was confusion, sorrow, and disbelief. The Germans, stunned and visibly distressed, reportedly apologized to Gunther's comrades. They had not wanted to kill him. No one had. The war was over. But war by its nature often resists reason, and its final moments were no different. What possessed Henry Gunther to make that charge? There are many theories. Some say it was a final act of courage, a soldier refusing to go quietly into the post-war world. Others interpret it as an act of redemption, a way for Gunther to erase the black mark on his record and prove his loyalty and bravery. If Henry Gunther's final act was an attempt to reclaim his honour in the eyes of the army, it seemed to have succeeded. The following day, General Pershing issued an official statement marking the end of hostilities and made a point of naming Gunther as the last American soldier to fall in the war. In the weeks that followed, the army posthumously reinstated his rank of sergeant and awarded him the Distinguished Service Cross, a recognition of bravery that ensured his name would not be forgotten. In the official division history of the 79th, his death is recorded simply and solemnly. Almost as he fell, the gunfire died away and an appalling silence prevailed. His body was brought home and buried in Most Holy Redeemer Cemetery, beneath a headstone that reads, "Highly decorated for exceptional bravery and heroic action that resulted in his death 1 minute before the armistice." I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Odd Historian. If you'd like to support the channel, please like and subscribe and check out my Patreon for exclusive videos. See you next time.